Richard and Sue Ellen Grellman and their family are facing up to the greatest challenge they've ever faced, and they say it's a challenge that has to be talked about. In her late 50s, the family noticed that Sue Ellen was changing. 4 years ago, she was diagnosed with advanced younger onset Alzheimer's disease. Richard and Sue Ellen had lived life to the full. For just on 32 years, Richard worked at accounting firm KPMG, 20 years as a partner. He was awarded an Order of Australia in 2007 and has since chaired organisations ranging from Genworth Mortgage Insurance, the Bible Society, to the Association of Surfing Professionals. At 65, he continues to be a mad keen surfer and a daily visitor to Sue Ellen at Hammond Care's Waldegrave House.
We met at St Andrews, Roseville in the late 60s. She decided we were getting married, and then therefore it became reality, which we did in our early 20s, which is what one did in those days. I was fortunate to have a job with a major accounting firm where I was a partner for 32 years. Decided to retire on my 50th birthday, having started there when I was 17. And I've been in the non-executive world since then, and so our life prior to Sue Ellen's illness was one of expectation that all of our hard work with careers and family would result in a lovely time together as we move towards our elder years.
When the illness became evident, what did you start to notice? How did she change?
Well, probably her forgetfulness, which you tend to put down to bad day, didn't sleep very well, I can't find my car keys, I understand what's going on. And it really was a full 5 years before it was formally diagnosed, which I gather is about the average.
So it took some time to seek medical help?
Yes, I think that we were, as a family, were growing more concerned that we had a major problem, but we didn't even talk about it amongst ourselves, and I can't really remember whether one of the kids said to me, "Have you noticed anything about Mum?" or I asked the question, but you tend to, thinking back, not want to Jonah the situation. And so we provided more support around her as a family. Ultimately took her off to see her GP, having met with the GP one-on-one prior to that. And I wasn't even sure of the ethics of talking to a GP about one of their patients, but lovely Christian guy and was terrific, and he made it his business to inquire about Sue Ellen's state of health from her perspective, and she said that she was a bit forgetful, and he said, well, why don't we do a few tests? And she didn't do very well, so he referred her to a specialist.
What are the kinds of words that you'd use to describe the journey that you and Sue Ellen and your family have been on over these past few years?
Very emotional, confusing, no roadmaps, not too sure what's right and what's wrong, confusing infrastructure around a disease like this, therefore an uncertainty about who to talk to. And all of that was compounded by the first specialist that we were sent to, who did not believe in using the A word. He'd use euphemisms like, she's a bit off the pace, she didn't do very well, come back in 6 months and we'll see how she's going. It was grossly unsatisfactory, but there's a school of thought that if you diagnose someone, then you're pushing them over the edge and their decline increases in rapidity. But it was just not satisfactory, and so I made it my business to find a second specialist and asked around as to who had the best reputation, and managed to get in to see him.
How prepared would you say you and your family were for this experience?
Oh, totally ill prepared. I mean, this is not something that you imagine is going to come along in your late 50s. Sue Ellen would have been mid to late 50s when the first signs were appearing. I don't think I knew about young onset Alzheimer's, didn't know it existed. I thought it was an old person's disease. But refreshingly, the second specialist we saw was very direct. Did a brace of tests, sat us down and said, "So Ellen, you've got young onset Alzheimer's, there's no cure. Here's a form to make sure that you've got all of your affairs in order. Here's a social worker, a gerontologist, you know, this and that. There are some medications we can try, but they're probably not going to help," and they didn't. So he said, "My advice, while you're relatively well, is to enjoy the time that you've got." It was refreshing, actually. I mean, we were relieved.
I was going to ask you that because though it's a pretty ominous diagnosis, there was also a sense of security that you knew where you were at least.
Well, we knew we had to get on and live the rest of our lives in a year or two. We didn't know what her rate of decline would be, and that's one of the mysteries. But my working assumption was that it would be 3 or 4 years. It turned out to be about 2 years before she became so compromised that we really had to think about providing more support than we could pull together at home. And for me, it's not only what I want to do, but it's clearly my lot to be her advocate, her primary carer, her defender, and her spokesman, because she can't do any of those things for herself anymore.
You could have retreated, could have curled up in a fetal position in the corner. Why haven't you done that?
I would have chosen the floor, actually, not the corner. But look, I think the choice is very simple, actually. It's you either drop to the floor and suck your thumb, or you just get on with it. It's a non-choice. You just have to keep moving forward. And having the specialist that we had, who I still see a lot of and work with him in a range of areas in terms of dementia research and awareness and prevention and hopefully cure, and I have the highest regard for him. It feels like something I can and should do. But for Sue Ellen, although she has lost her past and future, and she only lives in the moment, if I don't see her every day or two, I become quite unsettled. I need to see her, even though there's nothing I can do to help her, frankly.
What are those visits like for you?
They're quite sad. I mean, you know, your life partner who I'll typically arrive with a coffee and a cake, and she's now at a point where I have to break the cake up and pop it into her mouth like, you know, an 18-month child. No embarrassment for her or for me in doing that. And I just have to try and think of things to talk about, and if I forget, or if I can't find something new, I'll tell her what I told her yesterday, and she's hearing it for the first time. So they're draining, and I always have a sense when I'm walking in that this could be a good visit or a not so good visit. And then when I leave, I have a fairly heavy heart as to what's happening to my wife. But if I'm away or don't get here for a week, I become quite unsettled myself. And as I say, there's nothing I can do other than be here to love her. The staff do all of the practical day-to-day issues and do it very well. But
beyond being her partner, defender and advocate, you've also taken this issue more broadly to corporate Australia and beyond with the Dementia Momentum program. Tell us about that, Richard.
Yes, well, this is through an organisation called CHIBA, the Centre for Healthy Brain Ageing at New South Wales University, and two of the professors there are absolute best of breed, and they're looking to crack the mysteries of what causes it, how can it be treated, and might there be a cure. And along the journey, they're looking to raise awareness that this is a tidal wave coming towards us, because you and I are going to live longer than our parents lived. The actuaries will tell us. I mean, who's to say there won't be a medical issue that intervenes, but as we live longer, we are going to confront this in large numbers, us baby boomers, and it's a very expensive disease to manage. from a public health point of view.
What's been corporate Australia's response?
I've been very gratified. I think people that I'm talking to are seeing that this is much more than a human tragic issue. There's a very deep economic issue here, and it's going to cost the country, taxpayers, a lot of money in the next 20 or 30 years.
So they don't want to not know. It's what strikes me about your story. You're prepared to be out there with it.
Yeah, they're receptive, and most senior city people will have a parent that has some form of dementia and they relate to it. And then they're generally somewhat surprised to hear that someone in their late 50s can be diagnosed with this. Sue Ellen's just turned 64. That's a bit shocking to quite a few people. But the main game really is just the disease, irrespective of what age you are. What are we going to do about it? Because if everyone who gets it ends up in a place like Hammond Care, we need something like 5,000 beds a month to be built, if the predictions are right, to keep up with the demand. Well, that's obviously unsustainable.
There was one significant recent milestone in Sue Ellen's experience with this. Can you tell us about that?
Well, she came to Hammond Care March 2014, which in itself was a very difficult decision for a primary carer to have to make. It was probably the hardest thing for my journey on this particular experience, having to decide that the following day your life partner will not be going to bed with you the next night and thereafter. With the best of intentions, I was taking her out for coffee or to a musical performance or Sunday lunch with the kids. And I was finding that coming back was often a tear-filled experience, and she was unhappy to be coming back. Not so much to be coming back, but just unhappy. And the staff here said, look, maybe it's time that you didn't take her out, because I know what you're doing is well motivated, but it may be just not helping Sue Ellen. So early last December, which is now approaching 6 months ago, they said it's time for you to let her fall into our arms.
What was that like for you?
I have trouble even speaking about it without getting emotional, but it just felt right, actually. And I have to say, 6 months later, Sue Ellen is the best she's been. I think she's forgotten that there's another world out there, because this is her world. She's very well cared for. She's given the dignity of being allowed to take risks, as the staff describe it. So they're not totally smothering her, give her as much freedom as she's capable of. And we visit her here, and she's settled right down and always happy to see us, me in particular, I think. And you couldn't do that unless you had total trust in the people that are looking after her.
Yeah. Richard, can I conclude our conversation by asking you to speak to two different types of people who may be viewing this? First, those who are living with dementia. Second, that group of people who would be looking on from outside a direct experience with this. What would you say to those two groups of people?
People living with dementia, I would say, and I presume you're referring to the carers and the family. Primarily. I would say explore what the professionals can do, because from a probably misplaced sense of duty, you will hesitate to engage the professionals, and they are profoundly better equipped than any layman will be. They're independent, they're trained, and they're very caring and very patient. And I think that was the point that I'd got to. I had a carer coming in to our home. I had friends that were supporting. I was pretty well on duty through the night, but it became clearer and clearer to me that I wasn't doing the right thing for Sue Ellen, and she needed more support than we could. So I'd encourage people who are caring for someone with this challenge that you may well not be doing the best for them by keeping them at home. Not the least issue of which is that the carer themselves will start to struggle and may experience health issues. The second group that you refer to, Lee, which is what we're trying to do with the Dementia Momentum, is to raise awareness about the fact that there's an issue out in the community that needs a lot of commitment in terms of funding and dialogue, even prejudice. I mean, if you've got some form of dementia, you are pretty well consigned to a sort of a category where people will say things like, oh, poor old Lee is not the chap he used to be. Well, what's become profoundly clear to me, and this is a message I want to get out, and there's a movie that's recently released which I'll never watch because I'm living it, called Still Alice. Prior to that movie coming out, we were referring to Sue Ellen as Still Sue Ellen. She's lost most of her language. She can't do almost anything physically, but she's still Sue Ellen. And so to frame our thinking and the way we deal with her, it's just the same girl that just can't do as much as she used to do. And that helps all of us continue to love her and stay with her.
Richard Grellman, thank you so much indeed for sharing your story with us, and thanks for your time.
It's my great pleasure. Thanks, Lee.